They call it the farm. A place so massive it once swallowed entire towns, and so brutal, it was nicknamed the Angola of America. Welcome to Louisiana State Penitentiary, 18,000 acres of razor wire, swamps, and sorrow. This isn't just a prison. It's a world of its own, with its own rules, its own economy, and its own ghosts. Today, we go inside the most notorious prison in America, where men live, work, and die on the same ground that once enslaved their ancestors. The land of chains. Louisiana State Penitentiary, better known simply as Angola, sits on a vast stretch of land bordered by the Mississippi River. It's not just any land. It's a former slave plantation, once home to human suffering so deep it left a permanent scar on the soil itself. The name Angola comes from the African nation, the homeland of many enslaved people who were brought to this region in chains. And in a cruel twist of history, that same land would later become the largest maximum security prison in the United States. A place where black men, once enslaved here, would later be imprisoned under new laws that kept them bound to the same earth. Angola sprawls across 18,000 acres, larger than the island of Manhattan. It's not just a prison, it's a working farm, a self-contained ecosystem powered by human labor. Inmates grow everything from corn to cotton. They raise cattle, fix equipment, and even make their own coffins, because death, too, is part of the daily routine here. But to understand how Angola became what it is today, you have to understand Louisiana's post-Civil War history. After emancipation, the South faced economic collapse. Plantation owners lost their free labor, and state governments quickly found a way to bring it back, through the convict leasing system. Newly freed black men were arrested for petty crimes, or sometimes for nothing at all, and then leased to private companies to work in conditions almost identical to slavery. In 1880, the state of Louisiana leased the Angola plantation to a man named Samuel James, a former Confederate major who turned convict labor into a business empire. James worked his inmates to death. There were no regulations, no oversight, no mercy. Reports from the time described prisoners collapsing in the fields, left to die in the scorching Louisiana sun. The system was so profitable that when James died, the state took over his operation and turned it into a permanent penitentiary. The message was clear: freedom had changed its name, but not its price. By the 20th century, Angola had already become notorious. Guards ruled with whips, shotguns, and absolute authority. Beatings were common. Medical care was non-existent. Inmates slept in open barracks, packed together like livestock. It wasn't just a prison, it was a modern-day plantation. But Angola wasn't just feared by outsiders. It was a legend among prisoners. Stories of escape attempts, torture, and ghostly apparitions drifted through the prison grapevine. Men whispered about the hole, a windowless cell where inmates were locked for days or weeks, left to rot in darkness. And yet, amid this brutality, Angola functioned like a small town. It had its own radio station, a magazine, a church, even a rodeo, the Angola Prison Rodeo, a surreal spectacle where inmates risked their lives on bucking bulls for a few dollars and the roar of a crowd. For some, it was freedom for a few minutes. For others, it was humiliation turned into entertainment. Every inch of Angola carries the weight of history and blood. Even today, over 5,000 men live behind its fences, most of them serving life sentences without parole. As one warden once said, "At Angola, you either die of old age, or you die trying to survive." But the real story of Angola, the one most people don't see, is not just about punishment. It's about power, survival, and redemption in one of the most unforgiving places on earth. And that story begins with a man who dared to challenge the system from inside the walls. The warden and the whip. By the mid-1900s, Louisiana State Penitentiary had earned its title as the bloodiest prison in America. The phrase wasn't an exaggeration. It was reality. Men were stabbed, beaten, or simply disappeared. Angola wasn't just a correctional facility, it was a world governed by violence, where even the guards feared the night. To understand Angola's cruelty, you have to look at how it was built, not just in bricks and bars, but in attitude. The system was designed to break men down and rebuild them as obedient laborers. Guards were often former soldiers, farmers, or even ex-inmates themselves. Their philosophy was simple: control through fear. Inside Angola, there was no mercy, only hierarchy. The guards ruled the prisoners, and among the prisoners, another power structure emerged: the inmate trustees. These trustees, sometimes called freemen, were chosen by guards to enforce discipline among other inmates. They carried clubs, knives, and, in some cases, guns. They ran the dorms, controlled food distribution, and punished disobedience. In many ways, they were Angola's secret police. It was a system that turned prisoner against prisoner, a strategy that kept rebellion in check. And it worked for decades. One of the most infamous wardens of this era was C. Murray Henderson, who ran Angola in the 1960s and 70s. Henderson was a man obsessed with order. He demanded obedience and ruled with an iron fist. He believed that pain was the quickest path to control, and his policies reflected it. Under his watch, solitary confinement, the dungeon, as inmates called it, became a common punishment. Prisoners could spend weeks locked in cells no bigger than a bathroom, with no light, no mattress, and only a tin bucket for a toilet. But the brutality didn't stop there. Reports later revealed that inmates were routinely whipped, a punishment eerily similar to what had been done on the same land a century earlier to enslaved people. The whip had changed hands, but not its purpose. By the early 1970s, the world outside Angola was changing. Civil rights protests, anti-war movements, and a growing distrust of authority were sweeping the nation. Yet, inside Angola's gates, time had frozen. The same violence, racism, and degradation persisted as if the world had never moved on. In 1971, a group of inmates decided they couldn't take it anymore. Among them were three men who would later become legends in prison reform history: Albert Woodfix, Herman Wallace, and Robert King, later known as the Angola Three. All three were serving long sentences, but what united them was a shared sense of injustice. They saw the corruption, the racial brutality, the forced labor, and they decided to resist. They joined the Black Panther Party from inside the prison walls, forming one of the most defiant political cells in the history of the American penal system. The Angola Three began organizing hunger strikes and educating other inmates about their rights. They spoke out against segregation in the prison, against guard brutality, and against the trustee system that pitted black and white prisoners against each other. Their activism terrified the administration. In April 1972, after a white prison guard named Brent Miller was found murdered, Woodfix and Wallace were accused of the crime, despite almost no physical evidence. Both men were placed in solitary confinement, where they would remain for decades. Robert King, accused in a separate case, would also end up in isolation. For the next 40 years, these men lived in 6 by 9 foot cells, the longest period of solitary confinement in U.S. history. Their case would later draw global attention, becoming a symbol of systemic injustice and the abuse of power at Angola. But while the Angola Three were locked away, outside their cells, the prison was changing, or at least pretending to. A new warden named Burl Cain took over in the mid-1990s, bringing with him a different kind of rule, one wrapped in religion, morality, and the promise of redemption. To some, Cain was a savior. To others, he was just another man with a whip, this time made of words, not leather. Under his watch, Angola would become a paradox, a place of Bible study and brutality, hope and hopelessness, freedom of the soul but not of the body. And that's where the story turns, from pure punishment to salvation as control. The gospel of control. When Burl Cain took over as warden of Louisiana State Penitentiary in 1995, Angola was already infamous, a byword for violence, corruption, and despair. Cain stepped into a place that had chewed up wardens before him. The violence was relentless. The air reeked of sweat and fear. Many inmates were serving life without parole, and they had nothing left to lose. But Burl Cain wasn't a man who frightened easily. He was a former farm boy from Pitkin, Louisiana, a devout Christian with a preacher's drawl and a businessman's ambition. To Cain, Angola wasn't just a prison. It was a mission field, a chance to save souls as well as control bodies. He often said, "If you don't have Jesus in your life, you're gonna have the devil in your heart." To him, rehabilitation meant salvation, literally. Almost immediately after taking over, Cain began reshaping Angola into something no one had ever seen, a Baptist kingdom behind bars. He invited pastors into the prison, opened churches in every dormitory, and established a Bible college in partnership with the New Orleans Baptist Theological Seminary. Prisoners could now earn theological degrees, not in the hope of release, but to become inmate ministers preaching to other lifers. It was redemption turned into labor, a spiritual version of the old farm work. Cain's methods were unconventional, even theatrical. He held massive baptisms in cattle troughs, where inmates would be dunked beneath muddy water and rise to applause from guards and fellow prisoners. He spoke to them not as convicts, but as wayward sons. He'd say things like, "You might die here, but your soul doesn't have to." To the public, it looked like a miracle. National news outlets praised Cain for humanizing Angola. Documentaries showed smiling inmates singing gospel hymns, preaching from pulpits, and even producing a Christian radio show from inside the walls. Angola began to shed its image as the bloodiest prison in America, replaced by the narrative of the most reformed prison in America. But beneath the hymns and hallelujahs, a darker truth festered. Cain's gospel came with strings attached. Those who embraced religion, his religion, often received better jobs, better housing, and more lenient treatment. Those who didn't were left behind, still caught in the old machinery of discipline and deprivation. Some inmates began calling it the Church of Control. One former prisoner later said, "If you didn't bow your head and pray, you might as well forget about any privileges." Religion wasn't just encouraged, it was expected. Cain was a master at managing optics. He opened Angola's gates to the world. He let journalists, preachers, even tourists walk the grounds. The Angola Prison Rodeo, once just a local event, became a national spectacle. Thousands of visitors would pour into the prison each year to watch inmates ride bulls, sell handmade crafts, and play music in the sun. It looked like freedom, but it was a performance, a calculated illusion of rehabilitation. While the cameras rolled, men were still dying in their cells. Solitary confinement continued. The Angola Three remained locked away, their cases mired in bureaucracy and indifference. Albert Woodfix, one of the last of the three, would spend 43 years in isolation before finally being released in 2016, long after Cain had left office. Cain's rule lasted 2 decades, a remarkable tenure for a prison warden. During that time, he built a reputation as both a savior and a tyrant. To his supporters, he was the man who brought light into Angola's darkness. To his critics, he replaced one form of oppression with another, trading the whip for the Bible, the lash for the sermon. And yet, even his fiercest opponents couldn't deny one thing: Burl Cain understood Angola's soul. He knew that control wasn't just about fear anymore. It was about faith, hope, and the desperate human need for meaning, even in a place designed to erase it. By the time Cain resigned in 2016 amid corruption allegations, Angola had become a brand, a living contradiction. A place where murderers sang in the choir, where death row inmates studied theology, and where men serving life sentences built their own coffins, then prayed beside them. But beyond the sermons and spectacle, Angola remained what it had always been, a working plantation, powered by the labor of men who would never walk free. Every day, under the Louisiana sun, hundreds of prisoners still marched to the fields, hoes on their shoulders, guards on horseback watching over them. The same scene their ancestors endured centuries ago. And as the sun sets over the fields of Angola, the ghosts of the past whisper in the wind, reminding everyone that redemption, in this place, has always had a price. The fields of forever. The Louisiana sun doesn't show mercy, not to the soil, and certainly not to the men who work it. By 6 a.m., the air above Angola is already heavy, shimmering with heat and the smell of diesel and dust. A line of inmates, dressed in faded denim, moves slowly across the horizon. Each carries a hoe, the wooden handles worn smooth by years of sweat. Behind them, armed guards on horseback watch from the shade, rifles slung across their backs, wide-brimmed hats shielding their faces from the sun. It's a scene that could have been lifted straight from the 1800s. But it's not. It's 2025, and this is Louisiana State Penitentiary. Angola is the last place in America where men still work the fields under the gun. They call it field duty, but to many, it's just modern-day slavery. The prisoners pick vegetables, plant soybeans, and harvest cotton, all under the watchful eyes of guards, known as freemen. They earn 2 to 20 cents an hour. That's not a typo. 2 cents. For decades, Angola's defenders have argued that the work teaches discipline, responsibility, and the value of labor. But critics, historians, human rights lawyers, even former guards, say it's something else entirely, a continuation of the same forced labor system that built this land centuries ago. If you walk through the fields, the parallels are impossible to ignore. The rhythmic clang of the hoes, the shouted commands, the rows of bent backs moving in unison, and in the distance, the same plantation house, still standing, white pillars and all, now used as an administrative office. As one former inmate once said, at Angola, the past never died. It just put on a uniform. Inside the prison walls, Angola operates like a small, isolated town. There's a post office, a fire department, a radio station, a museum, and even a prison rodeo arena. Inmates make furniture, repair vehicles, cook, clean, and build, not for freedom, but for survival. Everything here runs on inmate labor. Everything. Some men have spent so long behind the fences that they've forgotten what freedom even means. They measure time not by calendars, but by the seasons of the harvest, planting, picking, plowing, repeating. The youngest prisoners call them old-timers. The old-timers just call themselves lifers. Many of them know they will die here. And when they do, Angola buries them on its own grounds, in a small, quiet cemetery called Point Lookout 2. Each grave is marked by a simple wooden cross, hand-painted white. No marble, no names, just prison numbers. The men who dig those graves are fellow inmates. They build the coffins, carry the bodies, and lower their brothers into the earth. And the cycle continues. The cost of silence. Despite decades of exposure, documentaries, lawsuits, investigations, Angola remains largely unchanged. In 2023, a federal court ruled that the prison's extreme heat conditions on death row violated the 8th Amendment. Temperatures regularly climbed past 100 degrees Fahrenheit inside the cells, where men slept drenched in sweat, gasping for air. Yet the ruling barely made headlines. The world had grown used to Angola's suffering. Every few years, journalists return, drawn by the contradiction, the Christian farm, the reformed prison, the American gulag. And each time, they leave with the same haunting conclusion. Angola isn't a relic of history. It's the proof that history never ended. The prison still houses over 5,000 men, the vast majority of them black, the vast majority serving life without parole. Many were sentenced as teenagers, raised entirely within Angola's fences. They grew up in a place that still works the soil of its own past, a place that preaches forgiveness while enforcing endless punishment. When night falls, the prison grows eerily quiet. The floodlights flicker across barbed wire, and the Mississippi River hums softly in the distance. From the chapel, you might hear a choir, deep voices rising through the air, echoing through the fields. Their songs aren't of freedom, they're of faith, of survival, of men who know they'll never see the world beyond the gate, yet still find the strength to sing. It's that contradiction, suffering and grace intertwined, that defines Angola. A place of despair that refuses to die quietly. A place that mirrors America itself, where progress is proclaimed, but the chains never fully disappear. Oh, the farm that time forgot. Louisiana State Penitentiary isn't just a prison. It's a monument to America's longest, darkest shadow. 18,000 acres of contradiction, where slavery, punishment, and faith coexist under the same burning sun. Every day, new inmates arrive. Every year, the fields are replanted. And every generation, the same question lingers. Can a place built on bondage ever truly be redeemed? Perhaps Angola's greatest truth is this: it doesn't just hold men captive. It holds a nation's history buried deep in its soil. And until that soil is free, maybe none of us really are.